They say time heals everything, but that's the biggest lie I've ever heard. Time doesn't heal, it hides. It buries the truth under work schedules, new faces, polite smiles, and the illusion of moving on. But the truth, real truth, waits. It waits in the quiet hours, when the world sleeps and memories crawl back out from where you tried to bury them. I left him 3 years ago. Luca Moretti. The name still tastes like sin and honey. He was the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about, and I was the kind of woman who thought I could change him. I told myself I loved him because I saw the good in him. But maybe I just loved him because he made me feel alive in a world that had gone numb. When I met him, I didn't know what power smelled like. I didn't know it could stand so close to danger and still make you crave it. Luca carried darkness the way other men carried confidence. He wore it like a suit, pressed, measured, perfectly tailored. And when he looked at me, I didn't see the violence. I saw devotion. That's how he trapped me. Not with fear, but with tenderness that felt like a secret only I was allowed to see. Loving him was like living inside a fire. Beautiful until you realize you're burning. He could be gentle one moment and merciless the next, and I learned to read his moods like scripture. The way his jaw tightened when someone crossed him, the way his hands softened only when they touched me. He said I was his calm, but the truth was, I was just another storm he wanted to own. When I finally left, it wasn't courage that pushed me out the door. It was survival. There's a moment every woman in love with a dangerous man comes to. That quiet second where you realize love has turned into a cage and you've forgotten how to breathe. Mine came the night I found blood on his cufflink. Not mine, not his, someone else's. And when he smiled at me, it wasn't guilt I saw in his eyes. It was pride. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream or beg or ask him to change. I just packed what I could carry and walked into the dark. He didn't chase me, not then. Maybe he wanted me to believe I'd escaped. Maybe he wanted me to live long enough to remember what being his felt like, because that's the cruelest kind of punishment. Memory. 3 years later, I can still hear the echo of his voice when I close my eyes. I can still feel the ghost of his touch when I lie awake. People tell me I should be grateful I got away, but the truth is, you never really get away from a man like Luca Moretti. You just learn to live with his shadow, because the past never dies. It just changes shape and waits for you to remember. The night I ran, it rained so hard it felt like the sky was trying to wash me clean. I remember the sound of it, relentless, cold, merciless. It drummed against the windows as if the world itself knew I was leaving something behind that wouldn't stay buried. I didn't take much. Just a duffel bag, a fake passport, and the last shred of courage I had left. Everything else, the clothes, the jewelry, the whispered promises, they all belonged to him. And I refused to carry anything that still smelled like Luca Moretti. The airport was nearly empty. The kind of silence that makes your thoughts sound too loud. Every step I took echoed like a confession. I didn't look back, not even once, because I knew if I did, if I saw his city, his skyline, his shadow, I'd falter. And faltering around Luca was the same as dying. Freedom didn't come easy. For the first few weeks, I didn't sleep. Every sound, every car outside, every phone ring that felt like a warning. I lived in cheap motels with curtains that didn't close right and locks that didn't feel strong enough. My hands would tremble when I counted money, as if even the cash carried his name. But each morning when I woke up alone, breathing air that wasn't his, I told myself, "You're free." And some days I almost believed it. I moved through cities like a ghost, Philadelphia, Chicago, then finally Brooklyn, where no one cared who I used to be. It was noisy, indifferent, and anonymous, the perfect place for someone who wanted to disappear. I became someone else there. Elena Ross, a woman with quiet eyes, steady hands, and a smile that didn't reach too deep. I bought a rundown coffee shop with the savings I'd hidden before I left him. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The smell of roasted beans replaced the scent of gunpowder and cologne. My days were simple. Mornings with regulars, afternoons behind the counter, nights with silence that didn't hurt as much as it used to. People liked me. They thought I was kind, hardworking, normal. But what they didn't know was that I still counted exits wherever I went. I still sat facing the door, never with my back to the street. And when someone ordered espresso in Italian, My heart still skipped a beat, just once, before I reminded myself he wasn't coming. Sometimes, though, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and swear I could smell him. That dark, expensive scent, smoke and cedar and sin. I'd lie there, still as stone, waiting for the knock that never came. And when it didn't, I'd cry, not from fear, but from the strange kind of grief that comes when you miss the thing that almost destroyed you. People think running is freedom. It isn't. It's just a different kind of cage, one you build yourself, with walls made of guilt and memories. And even as the rain stopped and the seasons changed, one truth remained. You can leave a man like Luca Moretti, but you can't leave the parts of yourself that loved him. 3 years had passed since I ran. 3 years of quiet mornings, mundane conversations, and the illusion of peace. I had become Elena Ross, the woman nobody in Brooklyn knew. The woman who brewed coffee with care, greeted strangers with a polite smile, and carried a past that didn't dare follow her too closely. My shop was small, cozy and cluttered with mismatched chairs and chipped mugs. I liked it that way. The imperfection felt honest, unlike my life before. People came for the smell of roasted beans, the warmth of the place, and my subtle nods of attention. They didn't know that, behind my calm, I was always counting exits, always scanning reflections, always listening for the whisper of a name that could undo me. The routine gave me comfort, even if it was fragile. I would wake before dawn, open the shutters, and let the city in with its noise and neon. I would grind beans, steam milk, and smile at people whose names I would never know. For 3 years I had survived on these small acts of control, convincing myself I could live without him. But survival, I learned, doesn't erase memory. Sometimes when the street outside glowed under the orange haze of streetlights, I would catch a shadow that reminded me of him. A tall figure, a sharp silhouette. My heart would tighten, my stomach would knot. And then I would remember, he wasn't here. He hadn't found me yet. And I was still free. Free, though, was a complicated word. It smelled like regret and tasted like longing. I could walk the city without fear, but I could never walk it without thinking of him. Even here, in my little corner of the world, I was still his ghost's hostage. I had built walls around my heart, thicker with each passing day. I told myself I didn't need the storm he brought, the chaos he carried. I reminded myself that love with him was never about tenderness. It was about survival. I had learned to live in the quiet, to value the small moments, to hold my own life without giving it away to someone who thrived on consuming others. Yet sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I felt the echo of his hands, the ghost of his touch, the memory of being looked at like I was both the calm and the destruction he had ever known. Those moments reminded me that leaving him hadn't erased what we shared. It hadn't made me forget the fire. 3 years later, I was living a life of careful choices and cautious smiles, but the truth was still there, buried beneath every decision I made. You can escape a man like Luca Moretti. You can hide, run, change your name, build a new life, but the parts of yourself that loved him, those you never get back. And sometimes, on quiet afternoons when the sunlight spilled into my shop and dust danced lazily in the golden haze, I would catch myself wondering, had he survived me too? Had he remembered? And without realizing it, I would answer the question in my mind. Of course he had. Because some men don't die. Some loves never fade. Some hearts, no matter how far you run, remain chained to the same storm. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon, the kind where the sun glints off puddles in the street and people walk quickly, heads down, pretending the city isn't as loud as it really is. I was behind the counter, wiping a mug with a rag that had seen too many spills, when I felt it, a presence that made my chest tighten and my hands still mid-motion. Across the street, through the reflection in the glass, I saw him. I froze. The world seemed to pause around him, like some invisible hand had slowed time just enough for me to recognize what I had thought I'd left behind. Same posture, same deliberate stillness. The man I had spent 3 years trying to forget. Luca Moretti. I didn't move. I didn't breathe too loudly. I just looked as if staring too long could make him vanish like smoke. But he didn't vanish. He stood there, calm and impossibly confident. And I realized something I had always known but refused to admit. No matter how far you run, the past has a way of catching you in the reflection of a window, in the corner of a street, in the quiet moments you think are yours. For a heartbeat, I felt panic rising. I wanted to duck, to hide, to disappear into the cluttered warmth of my shop. But a part of me, the part I had tried so hard to bury, remembered everything about him. The way he moved through a room and made it feel like he owned it. The way he looked at me like I was the only person alive. The way danger followed him but never quite touched me when I was near him. The coffee shop melted away. The chatter of customers, the hiss of the espresso machine, the smell of roasted beans, all of it fell to the background. There was only him, standing in the street, and me, realizing I could never fully escape him. I wanted to believe it was a trick of the light, that my mind had conjured him from memory, from longing, from guilt. But no, he was there, real, present, watching, waiting, familiar in a way that made my chest ache. I blinked, and when I looked again, he was still there. I don't know if he saw me. Maybe he did. Maybe that was why I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because if he had, I would have had to confront the truth I had spent 3 years hiding from. I had never really left him. Not in the ways that mattered, not in the ways that counted. I turned my attention to my hands, to the rag, to anything that could anchor me to the illusion of the life I'd built. But even then, his image lingered, like a shadow I hadn't noticed following me for miles. Like a ghost refusing to leave. That glimpse, that brief, impossible glimpse, reminded me of everything I had left behind and everything I could never truly escape. I realized, in that instant, that freedom had always been a lie. You can leave a man like Luca Moretti, yes. You can hide, you can run, you can even forget his touch for a while. But some men live in your veins, in the quiet places you thought were safe, and in the reflection of a street window. They are waiting for you to see them again. And when I finally forced myself to breathe, I knew it was only the beginning. I didn't see him again for 3 days, but I could feel him. The city has a way of letting you sense certain presences, the ones that matter most, even if they are supposed to be gone. Every shadow on the sidewalk, every black car that lingered at the corner, every man who seemed to move a little too deliberately. They reminded me that he was still out there, that he was still watching. When I finally saw him again, it was outside my shop. Just standing there, leaning slightly against a car, hands in pockets, silent. Not a word, not a movement to draw attention. And yet, the air itself seemed to recognize him, bending around him, making people step aside without realizing why. I froze for a moment, gripping the counter like it would anchor me to reality. My pulse was erratic, my thoughts chaotic. The part of me that had lived alone for 3 years, who had built a small life of quiet routines and simple pleasures, screamed at me to retreat, to close the door and hide. But the other part, the part I had tried so hard to bury, knew this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment I left. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He didn't call my name aloud. He just stood there, and in that stillness, he said more than words could ever convey. His presence, his calm, deliberate attention, the way his eyes locked onto mine with that unwavering intensity. It was a reminder that I had never truly left him. And he had never truly left me, and I realized, painfully, that freedom is always a negotiation. You can escape a man like Luca Moretti, yes. You can run through cities, hide behind new identities, build walls around your heart. But there are some men who live in the marrow of your bones, who sit in the quiet corners of your mind, and who come for you even when you don't expect them. For a moment, I thought I could maintain control. I thought I could assert that the years had changed me, that I was no longer the woman who had loved him blindly, the woman who had clung to his chaos as if it were warmth. But the truth is that seeing him, feeling him without touch, without words, reminded me of everything I'd tried to forget. The nights of intensity, the fear and exhilaration, the way he made the world shrink around us so that nothing else mattered. And in that moment, I understood that a confrontation isn't always about arguing. or proving yourself, or claiming victory. Sometimes it's about recognition. Recognition that you are still connected to the person you swore you'd left behind, that the bond between you is neither simple nor fair, and yet it exists, undeniable, unshakable. I stepped back, lowered my hands from the counter, and let myself feel it. Let myself acknowledge that for all my running, all my effort to erase him, Luca Moretti had already reached me. Not through violence, not through words, but through the undeniable truth of presence. He was here. He was real, and he was still part of me in ways I couldn't escape. The confrontation had already begun, even before either of us had said a word. And in the silence that stretched between us, I realized that survival was no longer the only choice. Some things demand reckoning, and this was mine. I tried to convince myself that he didn't matter, that 3 years of distance, 3 years of quiet mornings and careful routines had made me strong enough to resist him. But the truth is, resistance was never an option. Some forces exist in life that don't wait politely for permission. Some people anchor themselves to you in ways that defy reason, morality, and time. Luca Moretti was one of those forces. Even standing across the street, just a shadow framed by the city's noise, he pulled at me. Not with words, not with threats, not with anything I could see or touch, but with gravity. The kind of gravity that bends your chest and makes your pulse betray you before your mind has a chance to argue. I wanted to look away. I wanted to retreat into the safety of routine, into the small walls I had built around my life. But my eyes refused. They stayed fixed on him, and with every heartbeat, I felt the truth I had tried to escape. He still had me. It was a pull deeper than desire, more insistent than memory. It was the reminder that love isn't always gentle, that it can twist and tug at you even when it should be gone. I had thought I had grown, that I had learned to live without him. I had fooled myself into believing freedom was possible. But freedom is only an illusion when the things you fear and crave still exist in the same space, silently reshaping you with every thought, every glance, every remembered touch. I remembered the first time I realized he could control me without speaking. It wasn't fear. It wasn't intimidation. It was the way he looked at me. The intensity in his dark eyes that made it impossible to think clearly, impossible to refuse him. And now, years later, that same intensity still had a claim on me. It reminded me that some connections aren't meant to be severed, that some loves refuse to die quietly. I wanted to fight it. I wanted to turn, walk away, shut the door, and never let him see me again. But part of me, the part I hated and longed for at the same time, remembered every stolen second of passion, every shared secret, every brush of skin that had made the world feel infinite. That memory wasn't gentle, it wasn't kind, but it was mine, and it was his, and it refused to be ignored. The pull wasn't just physical. It wasn't just desire. It was history, memory, longing, and danger all woven together, impossible to untangle. It reminded me that survival didn't erase attachment. That love, even dangerous love, leaves marks deeper than scars. I realized that night that I wasn't being drawn to him because I wanted to. I was being drawn because he had always owned a part of me that no distance, no time, and no life I tried to build could ever reach. And in that moment, I stopped fighting. I let the pull exist without shame, without judgment, without hope or fear. I allowed myself to feel the gravity of him again, to acknowledge the truth I had spent 3 years running from. Luca Moretti had never truly left me, and I had never truly left him. The pull was real. The pull was dangerous, and the pull was mine to reckon with. The next evening, the city felt smaller, as if every street, every flickering light, had aligned to remind me that he was still a presence I couldn't ignore. I had convinced myself I was safe, that he had only been a shadow passing by, a trick of memory. But then the knock came. I opened the door to find him standing there, the night air draping over him like a cloak. No words at first, no introductions, just that same unwavering gaze that had haunted my memory for years. In his hand was a bottle of wine, deep red, Tuscan, the kind we used to drink on nights when the world had shrunk down to just the two of us. I hesitated, a flicker of instinct warning me to close the door and lock it, to return to the safety of routine and anonymity. But the memory of him, of everything he had been, and everything he still was, held me in place. There was no threat in the gesture, at least not the kind I could name. No gun, no intimidation, just the silent insistence of presence and history. He placed the bottle down on my counter as if it were a peace offering. And yet it wasn't peace I felt. It was recognition, a reminder that our story was unfinished, no matter how far I had tried to run. The wine smelled like the past, like warmth, danger, and memory all blended together. I could remember the nights we had poured it together, the way the dim light made his eyes dark and unreadable, the way he leaned close enough to catch a thought I hadn't meant to share. That memory stirred a tension in my chest, one I hadn't felt in years. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. Just the act of being there, the quiet confidence, the awareness that he could claim my attention without moving closer, was enough to undo the composure I had built over 3 years. My hands shook slightly as I reached for the bottle, though I told myself it was just the cold from the night air. The pull between us had not weakened. It had only grown stronger with distance, sharper with absence. He had not chased me across cities or threatened me with violence. He had allowed me to think I was free, all while ensuring I could never truly forget him. That night, over the simple ritual of pouring wine, I understood what made him different from any other presence in my life. He didn't demand, he didn't need permission. He existed in my space and in my mind simultaneously, reminding me that love, danger, memory, and obsession can exist in the same heartbeat. And I realized that what I had built for myself, my shop, my routines, my quiet independence, was only a fragile shell. The real truth was still lodged in my chest, inescapable. He still owned a part of me, the part that craved both the danger and the intimacy, the past and the possibility, the storm and the calm. That dinner, with its silence, its memory, and its unspoken claims, was not an apology. It was not a threat. It was a reminder that the past had returned to dine at my table, and that my heart, whether I liked it or not, had not left the room. He didn't have to speak for me to understand him. In fact, that was always the most dangerous thing about him. The way he communicated without words. The way presence could become persuasion. The way silence could pull more at your chest than screams ever could. That night, as we sat across from each other, the wine between us grew warmer, but the air felt colder. Not because he was hostile, not because he was distant, but because the space between us held years of memory, regret, longing, and loss, all compressed into a weight I had thought I had escaped. I studied him without meaning to, trying to reconcile the man I had left with the man who now sat so casually in my kitchen. His eyes were the same, dark and unreadable, yet layered with something I hadn't been able to name before. Was it regret? Obsession? A warning? Or perhaps it was every emotion at once, folded into one unreadable expression that reminded me why I had left him, and why leaving had never truly freed me. I remembered the nights when we hadn't needed words to understand each other, the quiet moments that carried more truth than any conversation could, the way his hand would brush against mine and silence would fill the room like an answer, the way his eyes would search mine, as though trying to memorize me before some inevitable loss. Those memories, once comforting, now clawed at me, reminding me that some truths don't die, even when you run. I wanted to tell myself that I was stronger now, that the years had built walls around me that he could not penetrate, but my body remembered him in ways my mind refused to admit. A flicker of heat under my skin, the tightening in my chest, the subtle ache that told me I still craved the intensity he had brought into my life. We didn't speak, yet the room was saturated with meaning. The silence carried the weight of everything we had been and everything we could not be now. I realized then that unspoken truths were often more powerful than confessions. They left room for imagination, for memory, for longing. They forced acknowledgement without compromise. I felt him watching me, and I realized how much of me had never stopped watching him either, even when I told myself otherwise. Running, changing names, building routines, none of it could erase what had been etched into my chest. Love and obsession, danger and devotion, memory and desire, they were all tangled together, inseparable, undeniable. And so we sat, silent, tasting wine that belonged to nights I would never get back, breathing air that carried our past like a ghost, acknowledging the truth we couldn't speak, that we were still connected, still tethered, still aware of each other in ways that defied reason. I understood finally that night, more clearly than ever, that leaving had never meant forgetting, that survival didn't undo attachment, that even when words fail, even when years pass, some connections remain alive. Some truths, unspoken, refuse to be ignored. And in that silence, heavy and suffocating, I admitted to myself the undeniable fact I had been avoiding for years. Luca Moretti still had me, whether I wanted it or not, and I still had him, even if it hurt me to admit it. I had spent years building walls around my heart, walls I thought were unbreachable, walls that had been the only defense against the part of me that still remembered him too vividly. I told myself I was stronger now, that I was a woman who had survived, who had learned to breathe without him, who had learned that freedom meant refusing to let anyone claim you again. But freedom is rarely so simple, and some men are not meant to be forgotten. Even after that night, when he left without a word, the residue of his presence lingered in my apartment, in the smell of the wine we had shared, in the air that seemed to vibrate with memory. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just my own fear, my own longing twisting itself into hallucination. But the truth was, the pull he exerted over me didn't need words or actions. It was there like gravity, invisible, unrelenting, undeniable. I reinforced my routines. I told myself that nothing about that glance, that night, could touch me. I arranged the cafe differently, adjusted my habits, tried to fill my space with mundane details that would distract me from remembering. I smiled at customers, practiced small talk, kept my hands busy, anything to avoid thinking about him. But walls are only as strong as the fear that built them, and I realized something frightening. I was terrified not of him, but of myself, of the parts of me that still craved his attention, that still longed for his presence, that still felt weak at the echo of his gaze. My guard wasn't keeping him out, it was keeping me in. Trapped in a tension between survival and desire, between memory and reality. Every time I thought I had achieved distance, I felt him in subtle ways. The way my pulse raced when a stranger resembled him, the way my chest tightened when someone mentioned the Moretti name in passing, the way my body remembered sensations I thought I had buried. It was exhausting, maddening, and humbling, and I hated it. I hated that a man who had left my life, intentionally, definitively, could still command my attention. I hated that a part of me still wanted to lean into the danger he represented, even though I knew it would destroy me if I did. I hated that my strength felt fragile, because it had never been about resisting him. It had always been about resisting myself. I realized then that guarding myself wasn't about building walls around him. It was about building walls around the parts of me that had loved him, the parts that had once thought I could survive his chaos and still remain intact. I had to protect myself from my own memory, my own longing, my own weakness. And so I stood there, in my apartment, in my shop, in my own life, holding my guard tighter than ever. Not because I could keep him away, but because I had to keep myself from surrendering to the pull he still exerted. Because even when you survive a man like Luca Moretti, survival is never enough. You have to protect yourself from the ghost of your own heart. I was learning, slowly, painfully, that guarding yourself is a lifelong act. That strength is not measured by distance, but by the quiet decisions you make every day to remain whole. And though I hated the truth, I also understood it. My guard was the only thing standing between me and losing myself entirely. The air shifted the moment I realized he wasn't gone. He never truly left. He had a way of moving through the city, silent, calculated, a presence that whispered in your chest even when he wasn't in the same room. And that night, as the sun dipped below the skyline and shadows stretched across the streets, I understood that the threat he carried wasn't always in his words. Sometimes it was in the knowledge that he could find you anywhere, anytime. I had convinced myself I was safe. I had a routine, a life, walls around my heart, and habits designed to protect me. But safety is fragile. Freedom is an illusion. And Luca Moretti had never been interested in illusions. He had always dealt in truths, even the uncomfortable ones, even the dangerous ones. The ones that make your chest tighten and your stomach coil with anticipation and dread. I felt the pull again. Subtle, insistent, like gravity bending toward him. It wasn't desire exactly. Not entirely. It was memory, history, and the raw understanding that some men, some loves, are impossible to outrun. My pulse spiked. My body betrayed me before my mind could argue. I reminded myself that this was him. The man who had once consumed me, who had taken what he wanted and left me trembling, who had taught me to fear the quiet moments as much as the chaos. And yet here he was, not in my apartment, not in my shop, not shouting or demanding, just existing nearby, letting the weight of him settle around me like smoke. The threat wasn't a gun or a warning. It was simply the knowledge that he could be anywhere, that he could touch my life in ways I couldn't predict, that my heart, my mind, my very sense of self was still entwined with his. I hated it. I hated the tension in my chest, the longing I refused to name, the pull that reminded me of everything I had left behind. I hated that I still cared, still flinched at the thought of his presence, still remembered the intensity of nights that had been equal parts fire and pain. But I also understood the truth. Fear and desire are two sides of the same coin when it comes to someone like him. The threat he posed wasn't violence. It was memory. It was possession without action. It was the silent, undeniable claim he had over the parts of me that were mine, and not mine at the same time. I told myself I would not falter. I would not allow him to break me again. I would survive this pull, this gravity, this quiet warning. I would keep my walls intact. And yet, even as I repeated those mantras, I could feel it, the lingering trace of his influence, the undeniable truth that some loves are threats simply by existing, and some men never need to speak to remind you that they still own you in ways that matter most. That night, I learned again that survival is not only about distance. Sometimes it's about standing still, letting the threat exist, and understanding that fear and longing can coexist inside you indefinitely. And even when you are determined, even when you guard yourself fiercely, some men, and some loves, are impossible to escape. I stared at myself in the mirror that night. Really stared, and I didn't recognize the woman staring back. The woman with tired eyes, lines etched by worry and sleepless nights, the kind of woman who had learned to survive in silence. She wasn't weak, not exactly, but she wasn't whole either, and she certainly wasn't free. Freedom had always been a complicated concept with Luca. I had walked away, crossed cities, changed my name, built routines, and convinced myself I had escaped. But the reflection in that mirror told the truth. The part of me that had loved him, that had craved him, feared him, needed him in ways I refused to admit, had never left. It lingered like a shadow behind my eyes, like a pulse that refused to slow. I touched my own face, tracing the contours as if I could find myself in the act. My hands shook slightly. I had survived, yes, but survival had a cost. It left you hollow in some ways, haunted in others. I had built walls, reinforced habits, and forced routines, but the ghost of him was still here, and no amount of planning could remove it. I thought about the nights we had shared, the moments of raw intensity, of connection so powerful it had felt like the world could end around us, and we would remain. I remembered the fire he ignited, the danger that made my heart race, the calm that made my chest ache with longing. Those memories weren't gentle. They weren't kind. They were sharp, cutting reminders that the man I had left was still present, still a force in my life. I realized that this reflection, this woman, wasn't a victim. She had survived him. She had built a life without him in ways that mattered. But she was haunted. She was tethered to the past, to the pull of a man who had claimed pieces of her that she didn't know she could ever reclaim. And in the quiet, staring at myself, I understood the cruelest truth. Surviving Luca Moretti didn't mean I had escaped him. It meant I had learned to live with his absence, while still feeling his presence in every unguarded thought, every memory, every quiet heartbeat. I didn't cry. Not yet. I only breathed, slowly, deliberately, and acknowledged the truth I had refused to name. I had loved him once. I had survived him. And now, in the quiet reflection of my own face, I understood that love, even dangerous, even destructive, even impossible to reconcile, left marks. Marks you carry with you no matter how far you run, no matter how many names you change, no matter how many lives you try to build. I saw my own strength in the reflection, too, the way I had endured, the way I had rebuilt, the way I had claimed small pieces of myself back from the man who had once threatened to consume me. But I also saw the truth I couldn't escape. That part of me would always be his. That part of me would always remember the fire, the chaos, the pull that had first drawn me in and would never truly release me. And in that reflection, I understood something I hadn't admitted before. Survival was not freedom. Freedom was only possible if I could live with the memory, the longing, and the undeniable truth that some loves, no matter how dark or dangerous, never truly die. I thought I had left that world behind. Thought the violence, the whispered deals, the shadowed names, the blood that once seemed unavoidable, all of it, belonged to someone else, to another life, to another me. But secrets have a way of resurfacing. No matter how carefully you bury them, they slither back into your life, disguised in the mundane, bleeding into the quiet corners where you thought you were safe. It started with the news. Names on a screen, headlines that made my stomach twist, echoes of a life I had tried to escape. The Moretti name was everywhere again. Bodies found, businesses under siege, whispered threats carried in hushed tones. My pulse raced, a familiar rhythm I had once thought belonged only to him. And then, the part that made my blood run cold. My name appeared, scribbled, defaced, linked to something I had never touched, something I had thought was far beyond my reach. Fear wasn't the first thing I felt. It was disbelief, then anger, then recognition. I understood immediately. He was sending a message, not just to me, not just to the world, but to the part of myself I thought I had protected, the part of me that still remembered, that still pulled toward him, that still carried him in ways I couldn't escape. I had lived for years thinking I had control, that my walls, my routines, my independence could shield me from the chaos he brought. But control is a fragile illusion. And Luca, he never needed to control me to prove a point. Presence was enough. Memory was enough. History was enough. And now it was all converging, uninvited, unavoidable. I sat in my apartment, staring at the headlines, staring at the words that tied me back to him. And I felt the old pull, the familiar weight pressing against my chest. Survival had taught me to move quietly, to calculate, to anticipate. But even with all that, even with every precaution I had taken, I realized there was no strategy for someone who knew you intimately, who had marked you in ways the world could never see. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to disappear, to hide, but there was no hiding from a world that recognized him, and through him, recognized me. His secrets had returned to me in the most indirect, insidious way. His presence had arrived without appearing. His influence had stretched further than my imagination could reach. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. I had built a life of careful independence, a life where my heart could exist without immediate danger. But the moment the shadows of his world touched my life again, I realized the truth. Freedom had never been mine. Not fully. Not when the man who had once owned my heart still operated in the dark spaces of the world I had tried to inhabit. The Moretti name was everywhere. And through it, so was he. And for the first time in 3 years, I understood what it truly meant to be haunted, not by memory, not by longing, but by the inevitability that some men, some truths, some loves do not stay buried. They return. And when they return, nothing in your life will ever feel safe again. I hated that I still felt him. 3 years. 3 years of distance, of independence, of small victories that made me think I had survived him. And yet here I was, trembling at a memory, a shadow, a name. Luca Moretti had always been the kind of man who could ignite fear and desire in equal measure, who could make the ordinary feel like danger, and the dangerous feel like home. And the truth I hated admitting was this: he still had me. I could feel it in my pulse, that rhythm that always betrayed me before I had a chance to reason. I could feel it in my hands. the faint tremor that told me I was not as strong as I pretended. I could feel it in my chest, a tight coil of memory and longing that refused to be ignored. Survival had taught me many things. It had taught me how to hide, how to avoid danger, how to keep myself whole, but it had not taught me how to stop bleeding for him. I tried to distract myself. Work, routine, faces of strangers who had no idea what haunted me. Coffee beans, counters, early mornings, but nothing could erase the pull, the gravity, the fact that my body and my mind still remembered him in ways that made me ache. Love doesn't make you weak, they say, but maybe it does, in subtle, insidious ways, not by giving in, not by surrendering, but by reminding you that even when you survive, even when you walk away, even when you change your name and build new walls, the memory of what was can still cut deeper than any weapon. And it did. It cut me every time I remembered his touch, his voice, the way he could make the world shrink until only the two of us existed. I hated it. Yes, I hated feeling like a woman who could still be undone by a man she had left behind. But I also understood it. Weakness isn't surrender. Weakness is acknowledgement. Weakness is knowing that some parts of yourself will always carry the weight of the ones who changed you, that some loves will always mark you, even if you try to live without them. And so I sat with it. I let myself feel it, the ache, the longing, the undeniable gravity of him. Because denial had never worked, running had never worked, and pretending I was unbreakable had never worked. Some part of me, the part I hated and needed, knew this truth. I was bleeding in his name. And maybe, in some cruel twist, that was the only way I could feel alive. Luca Moretti had never truly left me, and perhaps he never would. It happened when I wasn't ready, when my mind had constructed walls thick enough, when my pulse had slowed enough, when I had convinced myself that survival meant resisting him in every way possible. And yet he was there, as inevitable as the dark, as unyielding as memory itself. I didn't see it coming at first. One moment he was in the room, silent, his presence a pressure against my chest. The next, he was closer than he had any right to be, and the air between us felt electric, taut with anticipation and danger. I could feel the pull again, stronger than ever. The gravity of him bending toward me, tugging at muscles, at nerves, at every part of me that still remembered. He reached for me not violently, not with anger or force. Just a hand, deliberate, measured, brushing against mine. That touch, just a touch, made my breath hitch. My pulse betrayed me. Every instinct I had spent years cultivating screamed for me to step back, to resist, to reclaim control. But control had been an illusion long before he returned. And then he kissed me. Slow. Deliberate. Not gentle, not tender, not forgiving. It was a kiss that carried accusation, desire, memory, and warning all at once. It tasted of the nights I had loved him, of the chaos I had once craved, of the fire I had thought I could extinguish. My body remembered before my mind did. Every nerve ending, every memory of touch and proximity responded instantly, betraying me. It was punishment and confession and promise, all rolled into one. His lips claimed mine as if reminding me of who had shaped my heart, of who had once had the power to undo me. I wanted to pull away. I tried. My hands shook, my mind raced, but my body didn't obey. It had always known the truth. I had never really left him. Not in the ways that mattered. And in that kiss, I felt everything I had tried to bury for 3 years. The longing, the fear, the passion, the ache of survival, and the memory of surrender. It wasn't love in the innocent sense. It was dangerous. It was consuming. It was chaos. And it was mine, as much as it was his. When he finally pulled back, the air between us was thick with silence. Not regret, not apology, not explanation. Just the acknowledgement that some things, once ignited, never fully die. Some bonds, no matter how destructive, no matter how painful, remain unbroken. I pressed my hands to my lips, feeling the lingering fire of him, and I understood something terrifying. He still had me. Not entirely, not in control, but in a way that mattered more than anything else. And I knew in that instant that whatever came next, Whatever danger or chaos awaited, there was no turning back. Some loves don't end with departure. They end with acknowledgement, with the memory of fire that refuses to die. Luca Moretti had kissed me, and in that kiss, he reminded me of the truth I could never escape. Some men don't just occupy your past. They claim your present, and sometimes they claim your future too. The room felt impossibly small after that kiss. Air thick with unspoken words, with lingering fire and memory. I pressed my palms against the counter, as if I could steady myself against something I had no right to feel. And then he spoke. Not immediately. He never did. Luca Moretti always measured his words, letting them land like stones in water, deliberate, precise, and capable of drowning you. "You were the only good thing I ever touched," he said, his voice low, rough, almost haunted. "And I ruined that too." I froze. His words hit me harder than any act of violence he had ever committed, harder than any threat, any touch, any stolen night we had shared. Because this was different. This was him, unguarded, admitting something he never allowed himself to voice. Vulnerability mixed with danger, confession mixed with obsession. For a moment, the world stopped. I wanted to say something, anything. Words to protect myself, to reclaim control, to assert the life I had painstakingly built. But the words stuck in my throat, because the truth was undeniable. He had spoken to the part of me that had never left him. That part of me that had carried him silently. That part of me that had longed for him even as I walked away. That part of me that had survived but never fully escaped. His eyes held mine, dark and searching. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't demanding. He was confessing, and in that confession, there was a dangerous honesty, one that reminded me of everything I had loved and feared about him. The danger wasn't gone. The fire wasn't diminished. And yet, for the first time, I saw him not just as the man who haunted me, but as a man who had lived with the same weight of loss and longing that I carried. I wanted to step back. I wanted to tell him that none of it mattered anymore, that I was different, that I had survived. But even as I thought it, I knew it was a lie. I had survived, yes, but survival had not erased him. It had not erased what we were, what we had been, what we still could be if the world allowed it. "Why now?" I whispered, the words barely audible. My voice trembled in ways I didn't want him to see. "Why confess this now?" He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at me, letting the weight of his own truth linger between us. And I understood, and it wasn't about timing. It was about inevitability. Some confessions cannot be avoided. Some truths will not remain hidden, no matter how much time passes, no matter how far apart you run. For a moment, I let myself feel it. The pull of memory, the ache of longing, the dangerous warmth of the man who had never truly left me. And I realized, painfully, that confessions don't always heal. Sometimes they expose you. Sometimes they remind you of what you cannot escape. And in that exposure, in that raw, dangerous honesty, I knew the truth I had been avoiding for years. Luca Moretti had not only claimed my past, my fear, my desire, he still owned my heart. I squared my shoulders, trying to reclaim the fragments of myself he had so effortlessly unsettled, the fire in his eyes, the weight of his presence, the echo of his confession. All of it pressed down on me, demanding surrender. But I wasn't the same woman I had been 3 years ago. I had built walls. I had learned how to breathe on my own. I had learned how to survive. And that survival wasn't negotiable. "You don't own me anymore," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I forced the words out like armor, like a shield I was desperate to believe could hold against him. The tension between us was tangible, a silent storm hovering in the room. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something unfamiliar in his expression. Surprise. Not anger, not amusement. Surprise. As if he had forgotten, even for a moment, that I had lived without him, that I had endured his absence. "Then why do you still tremble when I'm close?" His words were calm, measured, but they cut through the air like glass, and for a fraction of a second I wanted to deny it, to tell him it was fear, that it was the memory of the man he had been, not the man he was now. But my body, my pulse, my very being refused to lie. Trembling or not, I had survived him, and that was my victory. I held his gaze, letting him see the truth, that I was stronger than the memories, stronger than the pull, stronger than the dangerous allure he carried so effortlessly. And yet I didn't move away either. Defiance didn't require distance. Sometimes it required standing still, confronting what terrified you while refusing to let it control you. "I've lived without you," I said. "I've built a life. I've learned that I can breathe without your presence suffocating me. I am not yours to take or to hold." Every word was deliberate, a declaration not only to him but to myself, a reaffirmation of the life I had fought to protect. He studied me, his face unreadable, but the air between us shifted. The intensity didn't fade, the pull didn't vanish, but the balance changed. For the first time, I felt a subtle acknowledgement from him, that I was no longer the woman who would bend entirely to his will, that I had learned, in the spaces he thought I had been powerless, to stand firm. Defiance isn't about rejection of love. It's about claiming your own heart, your own life, even when love is dangerous, irresistible, and impossible to forget. And in that moment I realized I could tremble, I could ache, I could remember every fire and every chaos he had brought into my life, and still stand. He didn't move closer. He didn't leave. He simply let the silence linger, heavy with unspoken truths, with danger and desire intertwined. And I understood then that defiance wasn't the end of our story. It was the acknowledgement that some connections, even when tested by time, absence, and survival, demanded recognition. I had survived. I had resisted. I had defied him. But the pull remained. And perhaps, in that defiance, we were both beginning to understand the truth. Neither of us could ever fully escape the other. I stood there, staring at him, at the man who had haunted my past and refused to leave my present. Luca Moretti. 3 years had passed. Years I had spent convincing myself I had survived him, that I had built a life that didn't include his chaos, his fire, his dangerous gravity. And yet, here he was, a living reminder that some forces in life cannot be escaped, only confronted. My mind raced, weighing the impossible options. Run again and reclaim the illusion of safety, of control, of independence I had fought so hard to preserve. Or stay, knowing that staying meant surrendering in ways that could destroy me, or in ways that could make me feel more alive than I ever had before. Either choice was fraught, either path uncertain, and yet both were undeniably tied to him. I thought about the nights of fire and danger, the nights of passion and obsession, the nights when I had loved him despite the peril. And I thought about the years I had spent building a life without him, the quiet victories, the routines that gave me a sense of normalcy. Could I abandon them now? Could I walk back into a storm I had spent years learning to avoid? But then I looked at him. Really looked. And I realized the truth I had been avoiding. He hadn't only haunted my past. He had claimed a part of me that I could never entirely leave behind. My chest tightened at the memory of his touch. My pulse accelerated at the echo of his presence. My heart betrayed me with a longing I refused to name. The pull was real, undeniable, and it was mine to reckon with whether I ran or stayed. Choice isn't always about what is safe or rational. Sometimes it's about what the heart demands, even if it's dangerous. Sometimes it's about acknowledging that some loves, some connections, are not meant to be neat or easy. They are messy, consuming, chaotic, and unforgettable. They are storms you walk into knowing there is no shelter, only intensity. I felt his eyes on me, dark, searching, measuring, waiting for a sign, waiting to see which path I would choose. And in that moment, I understood that the choice wasn't simply between him or myself, between survival or surrender. It was between denying the truth of what we had and accepting the raw, dangerous reality of who we were to each other. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every memory, every ache, every risk. I could run, but I knew it wouldn't matter. I could resist, but the pull would remain. And so, for the first time in years, I made a choice. Not because it was safe, not because it was rational, but because it was honest. I would not turn away from him. I would not pretend that I could survive without acknowledging what we were. I would face the storm. I would face him. And I would face the truth that some loves do not end. They do not wait politely for permission. They claim you, fully and irrevocably, whether you are ready or not. And in that choice, I felt a strange, terrifying liberation. The city outside had no idea what was coming. Thunder rolled across the skyline, rolling in low and heavy, as if the storm itself had come to witness what was about to unfold. And in the middle of it all, I felt the tension coil in my chest, tighter than ever, a mix of fear, anticipation, and the pull that I could never resist. It wasn't just the weather. It was him, Luca Moretti. His presence filled the room even before he spoke, even before he moved. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one he carried with him, the kind that could tear through every carefully built wall, every routine, every small sense of independence I had fought to maintain. I heard the faint hum of engines outside, men moving, shadows aligning with intentions I couldn't yet name, gunmetal, whispers, secrets. They were part of his world, and they had just crossed the threshold into mine. I had told myself I was prepared, that I could face him without faltering, that I could survive the pull and the danger without losing myself again. But survival is never simple when you are standing in the eye of a storm that includes both a man and the chaos he brings. He came closer, and I felt the weight of him like gravity bending toward my chest, not threatening, not violent, yet entirely capable of unmaking me in ways the world would never understand. His eyes searched mine, dark and unreadable, yet somehow soft, in a way that contradicted every violent rumor I had ever heard, every instinct that screamed caution. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside me, thunder and rain clashing with memory and desire, the push and pull of fear and longing, danger and attraction. I thought about running. I thought about every escape route, every plan I had laid for years, but the truth was clear. Running wouldn't save me. Not from him. Not from the storm he carried. Not from the part of myself I had left behind in his arms, in his touch, in his presence. So I stayed. I faced it. I faced him and I faced the chaos. Because some storms are inevitable. Some men, some loves, some truths cannot be outrun. And some nights demand that you stand in the eye of everything you fear, everything you crave, and everything you are, fully aware that the world will not protect you from the intensity of living with such a force. I let the rain beat against the windows, let the thunder roll through the streets, let the night remind me that danger and passion often come intertwined. I let him close the distance without resistance, feeling the tension coil tighter, feeling my heartbeat betray me even as my mind screamed for control. And in that storm, I understood the truth I had been resisting for years. Love and danger, desire and fear, chaos and connection, they are inseparable. And if you survive the storm without surrendering, you might just survive yourself. But tonight, survival wasn't the point. Tonight, standing in the storm with him, I knew it was about acceptance. Acceptance of the danger, acceptance of the pull, acceptance of the man who still owned pieces of my heart I would never reclaim. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one we were living inside. I pressed my hand against his chest, feeling the steady beat of a heart that had once both terrified and captivated me. I could feel the strength beneath my palm, the danger, the fire, the history that had defined us for years. And yet, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel until now. I could acknowledge all of that and still walk away. "You'll always own a piece of my heart," I whispered, voice trembling in ways I hadn't allowed in a long time, but not my soul. The words hung between us, heavy and raw, like smoke curling through the cold night air. He didn't move, didn't argue, didn't try to stop me. He let me speak them, let me claim them, let me assert the boundary I had built for myself. Even after all the chaos, all the longing, all the nights that had undone me. There was pain in his eyes, yes. But there was also understanding. The quiet acknowledgement that some battles, some fights, are not about possession. That love, even the kind that leaves scars, cannot always claim the person who survives it. I could feel his struggle in the taut lines of his jaw, the subtle tension of his hands, the silent weight he carried because he knew the truth. I was leaving, and there was nothing he could do to stop me without destroying both of us. I stepped back, just enough to feel the space between us, the distance I needed to reclaim, the air I needed to breathe. He followed my movement with his eyes, but he didn't advance, and for the first time, I felt the power of choice, the power to love, to remember, to feel, but not to surrender entirely. "Goodbye," I said. The word softer than a command, but firmer than hesitation. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. I had survived him once. I could survive him again, this time on my own terms. And then I turned, feeling the rain on my face, feeling the night close around me, feeling the lingering echo of everything we had been. Each step away from him was both a victory and a wound. Victory because I reclaimed my independence, wound because the pull of him never truly left. But I had learned something important. Survival and strength are not the absence of love or memory. They are the ability to acknowledge it without letting it consume you. I glanced once over my shoulder. His figure was still there, framed by neon light and shadow, rain sliding off his shoulders, eyes dark and unreadable. I didn't know if he would ever stop loving me. I didn't know if I would ever stop missing him, and I realized that I didn't need to know. Some things exist beyond closure, beyond promises, beyond explanation. I stepped into the night, and with each step, I carried both the ache and the liberation. He still owned a piece of my heart, yes, but the rest, the part that mattered most, was mine. And for the first time in years, that felt enough. The rain washed over me, the city breathed around me, and I walked forward, leaving behind a love as dangerous and consuming as the man who had once held it. I paused at the corner of the street, the rain soaking through my coat, the neon lights reflecting off puddles like fractured memories. I didn't look back immediately. I didn't want to see him, to give the last thread of this connection a chance to pull me in, but I couldn't resist entirely. Some bonds refuse to be ignored no matter how fiercely you try. He was standing there, framed by the flickering lights, shadows clinging to him as if they were afraid to leave. Luca Moretti, the man who had owned my past, who had haunted my nights, who had pulled me into a world of fire and danger that had both terrified and exhilarated me. He looked at me and I saw it all in his eyes. The longing, the regret, the obsession, the love that had never truly faded. I met his gaze for a long moment, letting the rain blur the edges of the city around us. I wanted to tell him that I was free. I wanted to tell him that I had survived, that I had reclaimed my heart, that I was stronger than the pull he still had over me. But words felt inadequate. Actions, after all, had always spoken louder than anything either of us could say. I raised my hand briefly, a silent farewell, a gesture heavy with emotion and meaning. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched, as if trying to memorize the moment, to imprint it on himself the way I knew I would. And in that stillness, I realized that some loves don't end neatly. Some men, some connections, some storms. They remain with you, not as chains, not as prisons, but as a part of who you are. I turned, finally, and walked away. Each step was deliberate, each step reclaiming my independence, each step affirming that while he still owned a piece of my heart, I owned the rest. My life, my soul, my choices. The ache was still there, yes. The memory of him, the pull, the danger, the fire. It would never fully leave me. But it no longer controlled me. I had survived him, and I had survived the part of myself that had been lost to him. I glanced once more, over my shoulder. His figure remained, a dark silhouette in the rain, eyes fixed on me. I smiled faintly, not at him, not for him, but for myself, for the woman who had loved, lost, survived, and reclaimed her life, for the woman who could acknowledge a love so powerful it had left scars, and still walk forward without surrendering entirely. And in that last look, I understood the truth. Some loves don't end. They linger in the corners of memory, in the pulse of your chest, in the rain-soaked streets of a city that witnessed everything, but you can honor them without giving them the power to define your life. The rain washed over me as I disappeared into the night, carrying both the ache and the liberation. Some loves are meant to stay behind, in the dark, in the memory, in the heart. And that is enough. If you felt this story, if it stirred your heart, if it reminded you of love, loss, and the courage to survive, subscribe, because some stories and some emotions are meant to be shared, remembered, and never forgotten.